Okay, the public comment is our first period, and anyone who has 2 minutes on any topic, please come to the podium and state your name and address. You have your 2 minutes. Mr. Klinger, welcome.
Good morning. Ben Klinger, I'm the Emergency Management Coordinator. I just wanted to give you guys a quick update on the statewide disaster declaration and our disaster declaration so you guys know where we're at with that. On May 28th, Governor Walz sent a letter to the President requesting a disaster declaration for the period of March 12th to April 28th. This followed up a preliminary damage assessment that was done throughout the state, including Winona County. The final numbers that FEMA took from Winona County, and this is just a preliminary number, was $247,000 in damage to public infrastructure. Our preliminary assessment was higher than that. The preliminary one that we did was almost $500,000, but working through that, some of the county roads are actually covered under a federal highway program, not through FEMA, so we'll still get the money for that. It's just we got to go through a different program that way, and this is just preliminary numbers. Townships and the county can still apply for more stuff. I talked to a township who wasn't included yesterday originally that now found some damage, so we'll be submitting that. FEMA will be back and do another damage assessment once this gets through the federal government. So that's where we're at with that. I just wanted, in case you guys were getting questions, we are working through it. Unfortunately, the federal government works really slow, so we're kind of in a holding pattern until the President approves the request, and then FEMA will come back and we'll work through that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak before the board on any topic? For the third and final time, is there anyone wishing to speak before the board on any topic? Okay, we'll close the public comment.
You got someone who wants to talk?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Mitchell Walsh. I live at 20687 County Road 33. I'm in front of you today to discuss my conditional use permit at 2900 Enterprise Valley Drive. I would like to build a primary dwelling for myself and family. I chose this distinct site for the beautiful scenic valley it sits in and felt this would be a great spot to raise my family. The local township had no rejections to this request. They thought it was a great idea. Planning and zoning did not go through the findings or discuss much on the proposal. I wanted to bring up the benefits of this property having a dwelling. The property is under 35% prime soils, as the building site will only affect roughly a third of an acre, keeping the rest usable, as my dad will probably use it on our family farm. This will increase the tax base in the county, so we don't need to keep raising taxes on everyone. The property is located in a small corner, surrounded by bluffs, a floodplain, a hilly terrain, not making it feasible for large farming. To the north is recreational land, which was actually split off prior to the purchase of it, of course. There's a DNR easement on the property that will not be affected. The entire building will be a code and not adversely affect any of the surroundings. Lewiston and Altura have no building sites whatsoever, so they're kind of restricted on growth currently. And this is all I have for you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, for the third and final time, is there anyone wishing to speak before the board? Thank you. We'll close the public comment session. I'd ask for approval of the county board minutes from May 28th, 2019.
I'll move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve by Commissioner Meyer and second by Commissioner Olson. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion approved. And next, we are acknowledging receipt of approved committee minutes. The first one is Planning Commission of March 21st, 2019. That's on page 16 of the packet.
I move to acknowledge both 4.1 and 4.2.
Okay, we have a motion to acknowledge. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Jacob and a second by Commissioner Ward to approve, to acknowledge items 4.1 and 4.2. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you. Consent comments and approval of agenda. Mr. Fritz.
I have nothing.
I would like to pull item 6.13 for a separate vote, and then I have just a update at the end of the meeting.
Okay, item 6.13 will become 7.01. And you have a report at the end. Okay. Commissioner Meyer.
I have a brief report about SEMCAC and their new director.
Okay. I don't have anything. Commissioner Olson?
I'd like to pull item 6.1 just for a little bit more discussion, please.
Okay, 6.1 becomes 7.02. Commissioner Jacob.
One future agenda item.
And Attorney Sonneman.
Just one item.
Okay. So let's proceed with the amended consent business. Mr. Fritz.
I think you have to approve
Yeah, I
that.
Move to
approve the amended.
agenda as amended. Sorry.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, the amended agenda is approved. Thank you. Consent business, Mr. Fritz.
Thank you. Consent business 6.1 was pulled. Department recommendation 6.2 approved performance measures resolution. 6.3 approved renewal of liquor and beer license, The Shed, York County Bar and Grill. 6.4 approve application for on-sale liquor, beer license, and off-sale 3.2% malt liquor license, Heartland Country Club. 6.5 approve resolution classifying each tax forfeiture and request DNR approval for sale of parcels. 6.6 approve renewal of liquor and beer license, Horse Bar and Grill. 6.7 approve resolution for Minnesota Trail Assistance Program. 6.8 approve LG 220 gambling application for exempt permit Pickwick Mill Inc. 6.9 approve Minnesota Department of Health Community Health Board grant project agreement for public health emergency preparedness. 6.10 accept funding for rail and pipeline safety for training exercise. 6.11 award bid for CASAF 41 reconstruction to Matthewowitz Construction. 6.12 approve purchase of curbside recycling carts. 6.13 has been pulled. 6.14 approve 2019 State of Minnesota Federal Supplemental Boating Safety Patrol Grant Agreement. And 6.15 is confirmed payment of disbursements. That concludes the consent agenda.
Okay. Do we have approval of the consent business?
I'll move.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion to approve the consent business as read by Commissioner Meyer, seconded by Commissioner Olson. Discussion, Commissioner Warren?
Just one, one item. I see Sandra is here. I appreciate, on 6.4, the Heartland Country Club, that is the Lewiston Golf Club. It is now being purchased by 3 independent business owners, which is great because it's a key asset to the community of Lewiston. And I just want to thank Sandra. She helped expedite some of the process because they were kind of under the gun, and she kind of went up, above and beyond to help them. I appreciate that, Sandra, and I know they appreciate that. It's as you noted, it's saying approve application instead of the total renewal, so it's still in process. But sometimes we need to change all our rules and regulations and be responsive to the public. So thank you.
Good. So we have a motion to approve the consent business as read. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approval of the consent business signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Okay. Approval of the consent business passed. Let's move on to item 7.01, which is the former 6.13. And that's on page 140 of the packet.
And Madam Chair, I asked to pull this, again, my stand is that I want some type of pay for performance factor considered in. And at our most recent AMC meeting a week ago Monday, as each county made their report, Steele County was very proud to say that they had negotiated all their union contracts and with steps and everything, and they have initiated, I don't have any details, they have initiated some type of pay for performance in their system. So that's my desire to do that. So I cannot support the contract as it is.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Do we have a motion to approve item 6.13?
I will move to approve it.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve by Commissioner Meyer and a second by Commissioner Olson. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approval of 6.13 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 4-1. 6.1 is on page 29, so, and that's the item that was brought up in the public comment period.
Maybe if I can get Eric to just discuss it a little bit, what the,
You have a PowerPoint if you wanted to see that from the planning commission meeting.
well, as I read through it, see just the discussion whether it was tilled in the last 10 years or not was kind of a,
That seemed to be the center of discussion for the planning commission, is that I think they felt that since there was some hay ground, it was an alfalfa, that they'd lose some cropland. That was the major concern by the planning commission.
you were on the planning commission or what? I mean,
Yeah, and I did question legal that night that if you read through these findings of fact that are in our packet, just about every finding there supports the application. And so I suggested that we're not treating this application the same as we've treated other applications, but the general consensus of the planning commission was they found one thing that they didn't like and they weren't going to approve it. And I did say that I would vote with the majority of the planning commission, which I did. And whatever you all decide to do today, I'm going to still vote with the planning commission. But I could definitely, in the past, this is something that the county has been supportive of. When you look at the location, this is not out in the middle of a 140-acre farm field. This is, it's really driving our economy by putting a dwelling in a kind of nice little niche area of the county that is very in line with what we've done with the majority of our conditional use permits on building on less than 40 acres. And I don't even remember the last time a request for building on less than 40 acres was denied.
yeah,
That's what surprised me, yeah.
that surprised me. And then as I read the findings of fact, it's the one little thing I'm questioning of, has it been tilled?
Thank you, Eric.
And
I don't know if I could answer if it's been tilled, but it's been cropped. They've been obviously making some hay on the contour strips.
but, I mean, doesn't it say specifically tilled?
That's standard. They did have discussion on that.
We've bent those. I mean, you don't have to have, this isn't like a board of adjustment where every criteria has to be met. Sometimes we'll have a third of the criteria that are not met in the findings of fact and we still approve them.
Okay.
And that's the only one, which we've certainly disregarded that many times in other applications.
Yeah, I think we're referring to number 6 of the findings. When you're reviewing a conditional use permit for a proposal that's a building site that's less than 40, we have 10 criteria that they have to look at, and specifically 6 calls out the evidence reveals that the proposed lot has existed as a non-tillable area for at least 10 years. And that's where they,
So it said
Tillable.
tillable. And there has been concerns by the Planning Commission that is that the right terminology we want to apply in that standard, because it's only applies to this very scenario where you're having a non-farm parcel of less than 40 acres, and there's that special 10 criteria that applies just to these. On the flip side, the applicant, as he mentioned in his comments, the parcel itself does meet the prime soil standard because it would be less than 40% prime soil altogether in its configuration. So that performance standard for a new building lot would be met with that request.
Commissioner Ward, you had your light, and then Commissioner Meyer, and then Commissioner Jacob.
So that term tilled, I think it should be changed to, to farmed. I mean, I'm sorry, do we support alfalfa? It's not a commodity. No, you can't collect government money by raising alfalfa, but I think we've had a discussion, or we should have a discussion when we talk about agriculture and dairy, that we want to encourage alfalfa. That's one of the best crops we can have on the lay of our land. You have to look back. I had to look back and what's changed. Well, Planning Commission members have changed. We have several new members on the Planning Commission. And are they following our zoning and comp plan closer by saying no to this because of our importance of trying to protect farmland? Does it make sense to put a house on one of these little tiny parcels? And we have allowed it. Almost everyone has been allowed. And one of the things that comes to mind is I would like the planning department to keep a log. What was the condition? What was the main reason for it? And are they denied or approved? Because I think it shows that most of these have been approved in the past. I don't know. I'm a big proponent of keeping ag land ag, and every time we take even a little chunk out, it changes the lay of the land in the neighborhood. Although the township had no problem with it, it's kind of a unique little area. It's a pristine little area. It would be a beautiful homestead. Is it a primary dwelling for this resident? I think this individual currently lives in Winona County.
Yep.
So then they would be
South of Altura.
Yeah. So I don't know the applicant. Is he a developer? Is he going to develop this and then sell it and then do another one and sell it? But that's not against the rules. That's totally within the rules. So again, there is some questions. But is the plan? To me, is the Planning Commission following the intent of the comp plan in protecting agriculture? I think yes. I think that's what they were following.
Commissioner Meyer.
I have a couple questions. So there is a dwelling there now on this parcel. So the parcel is roughly 17 acres, and it's going to be split. So does Mitchell live in the current house?
No,
Who lives there?
I believe it would be, it's just been recently sold to him, so whether it's sitting empty or a matter of whether or not he would rent that out at this point or live there himself, I believe is still up in the air.
Okay, so I get it that you would like to build a new house, but the current house could be lived in.
Correct.
Okay. And I noticed, I read the minutes from the Planning Commission, and I noticed there was a lot of talk about farm use. And it seemed, then I went back and looked at the ordinance. I know that if you're going to put a manufactured home on a piece of property, then it has to be like for health care or for help on the farm or a family member.
Not necessarily. A mobile home or prefab or modular can serve the purpose as the primary dwelling on a parcel.
But that conversation isn't applicable to the 40-acre rule.
Correct.
So-
You're not changing the parcel. There is provisions where you could put a second home on, like for the reasons you mentioned, for farm.
So that conversation that I read in the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting really wasn't relevant to this particular.
The applicant's not asking to have a second dwelling to support his farm. He's asking for a new primary dwelling.
Right.
And that can be a modular, that can be a manufactured, it can be a stick-built. He's not, it's not our place at the Planning Commission to tell him what his application should be.
Right. But he could live in the existing dwelling if he so chose.
That's not what he's asking.
He wants to
I get that
split,
he's not,
yeah.
but,
Yeah.
right. Okay, and then it does look to me like the the discussion about the non-prime and prime soils, it could meet or does meet, it could be configured to meet our requirements.
Yes, from my review, it would meet the soil requirements that we have.
Which really does mean then that it's the non-ag land issue that was the, kind of the point.
So he's not taking prime soil out of production, he's taking non-prime.
He would be taking some prime, but it's at amount and a ratio that meets our ordinance. We say a site, if you look at the total acreage, as long as it's under 40% prime in its entirety, you meet that standard.
Okay.
So you can still maybe build on it, but you're looking at the whole picture.
Right, excuse me, Commissioner Jacob, you're next. Are you,
I'm
is
done.
that?
Yes,
okay.
thank you very much, I'm done, yeah.
So the question, is it tillable? I think that sent up a red flag to the planning commission in general, because I think the planning commission felt like maybe the petitioner was trying to say that it was not tillable when we could in fact look at the video and see that there was alfalfa there. But then the discussion was had about should the ordinance be looked at on whether tillable is the right word, because a lot of farmers, including myself, are no-till. I'm actively farming that land. I don't need to till it. What's tillage got to do with farming practices? And then the question about, is the applicant a developer? I think that maybe was a question mark in the back of many of the planning commission members' mind, but the discussion wasn't had because it's really none of our business. I mean, the application, we have to take the application before us and apply the regulations that we have to the application in hand, and not take future intentions or things that are really, that's not what we're tasked with. We're tasked with looking at the application. And so I was the only one that on the planning commission that questioned why this is being really treated differently than all the other applications. I feel like, for me personally, it would be inappropriate for me to have voted with the planning commission and then vote differently here. What you guys do is up to you. I hope you look at it thoroughly and make the right decision.
I have a question. The idea that the applicant may be a developer, we will know that if he comes forward with another CUP request, right? And then that can be dealt with at that time.
That's still an individual request.
Right, but that could come at a later time, the opportunity to deal with that issue. Mm-hmm. Right, and since we don't know whether it applies at this issue, it doesn't.
We can't speculate on future intentions, and all
right.
we can speculate. All we can do is take the application in hand and apply the regulations we have.
Right, Commissioner Ward.
A question, and I'm sure it's in here, and there's several properties in a close proximity. Would this when you split this, would this have its totally own well and own septic system, or is there some sharing going on?
They could share a well. They would have to have an individual new septic system, though.
Okay. So now when you talk about sharing wells, is there anything in the codes or to have that well tested? Is that totally an independent?
Not from the county, but from lending and mortgage companies, I see that as a requirement anytime there's a loan. They do want to pull a water test, but there's nothing that would inspect the well. A lot of times it's looking at the records and the depth and the casing. Okay. And in this case, they would have to stand on its own.
Okay. And if there's two owners or multiple owners sharing that well, that's a civil
private agreement.
Yeah, they have to come up with their own agreement to
who's responsible for repair,
maintenance and repairs. We don't have to do anything with that. Okay. Right. All
The
right.
last thing I would point out is I passed out these documents, and this is the way that it was left with the planning commission, mainly the finding of fact document that was signed, and those are that is basically the framework for the discussion. If you change or alter that, you'd have to, I think, refer back to that document if you act contrary to that current document.
Commissioner Jacob.
So again, out of the ordinary, we did not go through each one of these findings of fact, which, you know, it's pointing to, it's saying that what was approved, if you read each finding of fact, it looks like everything supports it except for maybe one. So I think that was my question for legal is, how can we deny the permit with not even having gone through the findings of fact?
Commissioner Ward.
With those comments that Commissioner Jacob just made, and we got attorney sitting at the end, I know Attorney Sonneman was not present at this. It was Stephanie Nuttall with our ongoing litigation regarding findings of fact and things like that. Can we send this, you know, and knowing that the decision was kind of made after they got to, the prime soils, and then the rest was kind of glanced over. Is it an option for us to send this back to the Planning Commission to continue the discussion regarding all findings of fact?
Commissioner, I think Ms. Qualley, the Environmental Services Director, would like to speak to this. Give me a signal here. So.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, the approval of the findings of facts as staff's draft can be accomplished by the Planning Commission if they concur. That was part of the training that took place with the County Attorney's Office over the winter in January, I believe it was. And in fact, the Planning Commission Chair asked the question of legal that night if it could be approved as a slate, and I believe Mark Clark did as well. And the answer was the affirmative. So that was discussed, in fact, last year, that if there are times that there aren't any changes recommended, whether the staff's technical analysis indicated that a condition was met or not met, that if there weren't changes to the slate of findings of facts, that they could be approved as a unit. So that's been reiterated a couple of times at the Planning Commission, and that was in fact the case at this one. Thank you.
All right.
Commissioner Jacob.
So legal is saying that this is okay for the Planning Commission to have done. To me, it just doesn't make sense that every one of the findings runs contrary to the recommendation. It seems like normally you would look to support your recommendation to deny. You wouldn't adopt all these findings of fact that support just the opposite, which is to approve. The recommendation and the findings are not in harmony in my mind.
It looks like it's finding of fact number 6 that's in question. That's on page 34, where it says the use is not in conformance with the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, well, 6, 13,
13.
and 16.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But in discussing what looks like the facts, you know, there are circumstances, and I know in the history of the Planning Commission, we have approved applications like this in the past. I don't know what the wishes of the board. Commissioner Olson.
Well, and the reason I pulled this is because it doesn't seem to fit. It doesn't meet what they've done in the past. I very rarely see one of these not supported. And I do understand Commissioner Ward that we do want to preserve agricultural land, but there's nothing to say if you own the land you have to use it for agriculture. They could just sit there and do nothing if you choose because you're the landowner. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I'm going to support the application.
We obviously have at least four people in the, can I ask if are they neighbors, or what brought you, and is there conflict in the neighborhood? Because we talk about this 40 acres, and then we've allowed people to divide it down into smaller chunks. And I have conflict in my district. I have people saying, what are you doing allowing, I always thought you had to have 40 acres. And I said, no, you can do it without all the, permissions you need to ask through a conditional, but you can split it down with a conditional use permit. And I have some people in my neighborhood saying they don't like that. And then I have some people in the neighborhood saying they like that. So there is conflict in the rural communities, I think. And could I ask them to, if they have specific interest, to step to the podium and express those? I mean, they made the effort to come to our meeting, and I would like to hear from them.
I agree. Does the board have any
You have the right
objection?
to ask.
Yeah, so if you all want to come up here, or one or two, what's the concern in the neighborhood? I would
Please
like to
come
know.
to the podium.
Yeah, I need you to come to the podium,
This will
state
be on record.
name and address, please.
Dan Daly, 21230 Enterprise Valley Drive, and it's a rural area. We have a good neighborhood the way it is. I heard that this guy's a developer. I don't know for sure.
So are you opposed or for? Or neutral?
There was a feedlot there, I believe. I'm a farmer.
Mr. Peterson's property was a feedlot, wasn't it?
Yeah.
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 And that's part of this whole parcel, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is tillable land. It has been since I remember,
Okay. All right.
and it's not 40 acres.
Okay. Any other neighbors?
Gail Rasmussen, 20955 Enterprise Valley Drive. We don't have a problem with if he decided to stay there for 20, 30 years. But if he's going to be there for a year or 2 or 6 months and then sell it off and go and do it again, no. Just my opinion.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. And I will remind this board that in a future conversation we have, do we support small agriculture or do we support large agriculture? So if you tend to take these small parcels out of potential agriculture production, then you're contrary to what, the discussion is, do we support, what type of agriculture do we support? Could this support a small, operation? Potentially. But again, it's their land, and you're right. At this point in time, we have no mandate that they have to raise, livestock or vegetables or anything like that. So, but I do appreciate what the neighborhood, thinks.
Okay, thank you for coming and speaking. Commissioner Meyer and then Commissioner Jacob.
Oh, well, I think that the questions that we just had probably answer my question. I had read the minutes from the meeting, and it looked like some neighbors were in support. So.
Yeah, and some not.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Jacob.
Well, there was considerable discussion about whether a feedlot existed or not, and whether it had been registered or not. And ultimately, in the end, the applicant had purchased that property and would be the one to decide whether it's going to be used as it's his. He can say whether it's going to be a feedlot in the future or not, or what kind of setback the second property would need from the first property. He owned them both, so it really became if he said it wasn't going to be a feedlot, then it was kind of a non-issue.
Commissioner Olson.
It kind of reminds me of a conversation I had with Commissioner Jacob before he was a commissioner. And it was a proposal that he had brought forth to the Planning Commission. And I said, I don't like what you're doing, but I think you have the right to do it. So I'm going to just make a motion that we approve it. We'll see where that goes.
Do we have a second? I second for just further discussion. Commissioner Meyer.
I do have some discussion. It has to do with the additional conditions. So In addition to the findings of fact, and so this is kind of for you, Greg, Commissioner Olson. In addition to the findings of fact, there were some additional conditions that were recommended. Is that right? And are you including those?
Are you referring to the conditions on page 30 and 31 of the Planning Commission minutes?
So
the Planning Commission packet?
Yeah, this is the packet that
Right.
What page?
Mr. Johnson passed out to us, and it
30 and 31. of it.
34 and 35, actually.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, so the findings of fact are 32 and 33, and then there are
As long as the final.
9 conditions that were recommended. And I just wanted to understand if that was part of a deal.
I think that would be important to include that. So I would include that in my amended motion, maybe.
Yes, I would agree. The findings of fact and the conditions would go together as a complete packet. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. We have a motion to approve the permit applicant, and the motion was made by Commissioner Olson, seconded by Commissioner Kavesi. Is there further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Oppose?
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
Okay, the motion carries 3-2, so this CUP is approved, reversing the decision of the Planning Commission per our discussion. Commissioner Ward.
So I have concern now, what message we've sent to the Planning Commission. We have a comp plan, we have a land, use ordinance, and they felt one way unanimously, and this was a split 3-2. What's the message and what information do we send to the Planning Commission?
Commissioner Jacob.
Well, along those lines, the Planning Commission knows that, and they state it at the end of each application, this is a recommendation to the county board. The county board will make the final decision. So I think the Planning Commission gave their position on it. The county board has every right to look at, review, and I felt an allegiance to the Planning Commission. I kind of think the right thing happened here, but I couldn't vote against the Planning Commission, so.
Okay, Commissioner Meyer.
I would say
Thank you for that comment.
that if I had a message to send to the Planning Commission, it would be that I need robust findings of fact, and that their justifications to agree or disagree with the findings of fact and the additional conditions need to be strong enough that at this meeting we don't guess what they might have intended. And I know that that's been part of the instruction that staff and the county attorney's office has really tried to instill for them. But if I had any advice, it would be please make that as strong as you can so that we understand exactly what you're thinking.
Commissioner Olson.
Don't have to try and guess.
And the message, I greatly appreciate what the neighbors have to say. And as I went back to my conversation I had with Commissioner Jacob many years ago, I might not like what they're doing. I think they have a right to do certain things. And as I looked at that one condition, I didn't think that was a strong condition to deny. So.
Yeah, that was pretty much my reasoning, would be to have thorough discussion on the findings of fact that we can understand and that we can see the judgment process. If it is a development, then we'll know if he makes a further application for a CUP for additional housing. And I think that can be addressed at that point, because then that would not be in support of the comprehensive plan. So that concern is not quite on the table yet. Commissioner Ward.
Okay, well, to address your development, I guess, unless the applicant's trying to put multiple houses on that parcel, it's not, in our definitions, I don't believe it's called a development. If he goes across the county buying properties and doing this, it in no way is
Still not a
considered,
development.
it's still not development.
Right.
To me, number 6, and then uniquely in the Planning Commission packet, and that's on page 32, number 6, the use, and it's in red, is not in conformance with the comprehensive plan of the county. And I guess, I've always said the comprehensive plan is a philosophy, but I guess this reiterates it, that it's just a philosophy, it's not hard fact or anything. But again, I will reiterate in future conversations, what are you doing to the lay of the land if you're promoting small ag? You just took a chunk, you pretty much guaranteed it's not going to be, maybe a little hay is going to be made off of it. That would be a benefit. But every time we put a house out in the country, we're taking away a little of the ag land. It's happening in my neighborhood. I see it as I drive around. I'll remind you that that was the decision made today. And I do stand by the comp plan, and I do stand by the Planning Commission.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Any further discussion? We have passed the item. Okay. We are now on general business. We have item 7.1, the report from the Southern Minnesota Regional Medical Examiner's Office for 2018, and that's on page 182 in your packet. Thank you.
Madam Chair and fellow commissioners, thanks for having me here today.
Exciting topic. Death and taxes. That's what we talk about, right?
Can't avoid either one of them.
That's right.
And so my name is Ross Reichert, and I'm the medical examiner for Winona County and the chief medical examiner for the Southern Minnesota Regional Medical Examiner's Office. And I'm going to just sort of walk through our annual report. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions as we go along. I'll have time at the end for questions as well. So if you go to the next slide. And so we often get asked what counties we cover, and so the dark blue counties on the screen are the counties that I'm the medical examiner for, and directly support the medical examiner system in those counties and via the Southern Minnesota Regional Medical Examiner's Office. Steele County, we do their autopsies, but I'm not the medical examiner for that county. Go to the next slide. So this is a list of our staff. We've recently hired another forensic pathologist, Dr. Reed Quinton. He comes to us from Dallas County, Texas, where he was assistant chief medical examiner for many years. So we're fortunate to have recruited him and he has a lot of really good experience. Below that, you'll see our supervisor of death investigations is Monica Kindle, and she's with me today. You'll see a number of other support staff as well. But I'd also like to really highlight the field investigators in Winona County, because those are the folks that are in Winona County here 24/7, 365, and are really the front lines of our office, and they're really what we're dependent on to do the best investigation and make the best cause and manner of death determination. At the bottom of the screen, the list of staff, those are people back in our central office in Rochester that also help support the office and the practices here, including our Office of Decedent Affairs and our pathology reporting specialist. So that's really our administrative infrastructure. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the number of cases that were reported last year to us, and so it was 301. The number of cases that we did complete autopsies on were 45. One, we did an external examination. The number of deaths that we certified without postmortem examination was 27. And so what that means is they were under our jurisdiction by statute, but we felt we had enough medical records and other documentation to complete the death certificate without doing the postmortem examination. So this could be someone who fell, broke their hip, and had injuries, and it was very well documented. And so that's sort of part of the decision-making process. You'll see the number of deaths that were not certified by our office after investigation, 229. And so these were cases that were reported to us. We investigated them and decided they didn't need to remain under our jurisdiction, so we would return that back to the primary care doctor to sign the death certificate. Sort of an interesting note, so we've started trying to track the number of deaths in the county. So it was 362 last year, and our office touched about 83% of those deaths from a variety of malpractices. So kind of an interesting statistic, I think, actually. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to do? One of the things that the main objective is completing the death certificate. Where there's a lot of information on the death certificate. The two main components that we're working on are the cause and manner of death. So the cause is the underlying reason why someone died, and that's important for a lot of reasons, for the family, for the next generations in the family, for public health reasons, for a lot of different reasons, as you might imagine. The manner of death is the circumstances surrounding the death. So there's 5 categories of that: natural accident, suicide, homicide, and undetermined. And there's also a variety of other pieces of information. We just listed some here just as sort of informational for those of you who aren't out reading the fine print of death certificates regularly, but they're tracking things such as, were they pregnant at the time? Did this occur at work? Was it, was it some sort of transportation involved in the death? And so that's just some of the sort of statistical data that's being gathered. And as you might imagine, it's being used by the families, and this is very helpful, particularly with our evolving sort of molecular and genetic testing that's happening in medicine. This can be very important for families in the future. Did they have early onset Alzheimer's disease? Did they develop breast cancer at an early age? That sort of thing can be really important for generations to come. And obviously our data rolls up to the Minnesota Department of Health and onto the CDC. And so when you see things like what's the number of opioid deaths last year, how many flu deaths occurred, that's really starting at the front lines with our office and sort of rolling all the way up to the national level. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there are a number of categories of manner of death, and so this is year-over-year data here, and so it's kind of nice that we're getting the power of that and sort of being able to see it over a number of years. And what you see is that the vast majority of deaths in Winona County are natural, and so that's obviously preferable. We had 25 accidental deaths and 2 suicides. There were no homicides last year. Next slide, please. So deaths by unnatural causes. So this is basically pulling out the natural deaths and breaking it up by the ways in which individuals died. So you'll see falls and drug poisonings or overdoses are really the leaders. Falls sometimes surprises people. These are typically older individuals, elderly folks who have many comorbid conditions, and the fall and the trauma is a significant stress that ends up sort of driving the reason why they passed away. Drug overdose deaths, there were 9 last year. It was up a little bit from last year, from the previous year, but you can see there's been some variability. It has been trending up again since 2015. And we'll talk more about drug overdose deaths in a moment. Next slide, please. Suicide by means. So there were 2 suicides last year. Both of them were hangings. Next.
Do we know the ages of the suicide?
I don't know off the top of my head. What's that? Okay, we can find the age for you. So the next slide is the suicide rate per capita. Folks seem interested, obviously, to sort of benchmark where their county is compared to other counties in the region, as well as the state and nationally. And so this is 2017 data because that's what's available. It's a year behind at the national level. But again, this is the rate, and you see the highest rate, and so Winona significantly below that, as is Minnesota. Again, so it's the rate, so we're dealing with small numbers here, so obviously that can shift dramatically with just a few numbers. Next slide. So homicides, there were 0 last year, which I'm sure the county attorney office is very thankful for. Next slide is the homicide rate per capita. So this is, again, 2017 data, so there's 1 homicide last year, but you see that we're significantly lower than the highest rates in the country. So that's obviously a good thing for our communities. accidental deaths by type. And so again, getting a little bit more granular and just pulling out the accidental deaths. You'll see that again, falls and poisonings, which is the sort of public health term for drug overdose deaths, are really the leaders significantly there, followed by motor vehicle accidents, which has been relatively stable. And we had one choking death and one burn or thermal injuries. So moving in on the next slide into a little bit more granularity about the type of vehicle-related deaths. And so again, from a public health standpoint, this is really something that medical examiners have tracked for years, because up until about 8 years ago, the leading cause of accidental death in the United States was motor vehicle accidents. So this was obviously a sort of a major interest for sort of preventable deaths. About 8 years ago, for the first time, drug overdose deaths superseded motor vehicle accidents as the leading cause of accidental deaths. Just to give you a sense of what sort of scale we're talking about with drug overdose deaths, so when that transition occurred, it was roughly around 30,000 deaths per year is what we're talking about. The estimated data from last year for drug overdose deaths in the United States was 65,000. So you can just imagine when you hear that, when people talk about epidemic, it's a real epidemic. I mean, that's amazing increase. So anyhow, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment.
On the vehicle crashes, you have a category called other. Is that bicycle and ATV or?
Yes, that was actually, that one was an ATV.
Okay.
Yes. And the pedestrian was a pedestrian that was struck by a train. We go to the next slide. What we've been trying to do is map out where these occur. And so this, as you can see from the key, is the type of vehicle that was involved in the location. Again, with the idea that if this allow us to overlay year after year to see if we happen to see a pattern of where these types of injuries or deaths are occurring. The smaller dots is just one. If it's bigger, it's two. So keep in mind that could just be because there's two individuals that died in that event. If we go to the next slide, this is just the actual vehicle deaths, some all comers, and this is just the subsequent years, and we can see that they're relatively evenly spread on around the county. So we don't see a cluster in a particular area, which is sort of the reason why this question arose. On the next slide, this is the 2017 data. Again, this is the per capita rate. So we're dealing with small numbers. So again, if you have a multi-fatality car crash, that can really drive that number. But we're significantly below the highest national rate, which is in this example, Mississippi, and we're a little bit above the state. But again, these are really quite small numbers. Next slide.
Wait, I'm sorry, on that chart.
Yep.
Houston County, you have it 4 and per the 100,000.
Yeah.
So it just looks terrible to live in Houston County.
Correct.
Okay, but it's because it's smaller than Goodhue or Olmsted or anything. Okay, all right.
So it's not terrible to live there.
Okay, it's safe. It's still relatively safe.
It is relatively safe, and that's what I sort of caution with these numbers, because again,
Yeah, it looks.
small numbers, it can really skew it, and we've included this because some county boards have really requested this for that perspective. And I think it's reasonable. We just have to make sure we don't say, okay, our homicide rate went up 100% because we've had 2. I mean, so it just have to keep it in perspective.
Right. So it might be interesting because I don't know Mississippi that well, that it's a high crime, or vehicle, but you always read about the big cities, the New Yorks, the Los Angeleses and such. So maybe put those in there. And I know they have a lot more people, but
Well, and there's a lot there. I mean, so when you look at we literally just picked for these the highest published, so that people sort of had the other end of the spectrum to compare. And so that's Mississippi, and that's motor vehicle rates. When you look at homicides rates, I mean, you can have a very dense area that has a high homicide rate, and so there's a number of them, and so that's really to drive that per capita rate. And so, if it's in a high crime area, and it's a small, that really moves that dial. Okay, so next slide. So this is the deaths related to poisoning or drugs, and so Last year we had 9. The other category was air duster, and so people, that's the sort of canned air, if you will, and so people huff that, and that can result in death. We had 3 that were illegal drugs, 1 that was prescription medication, and 4 that were mixed drugs. And on the next slide, we break it down a little bit more granularly to see what kind of drugs were involved. So we had 1 cocaine, fentanyl, and so this is a really prevalent these days, unfortunately. And you see that it went up from 2 to 4. Heroin and morphine. So morphine is a metabolite of heroin. So that's really often one of our more subtle markers that it was a heroin death. So that was 2. Methamphetamine, 3. Methamphetamine, despite the focus on opioids, methamphetamine is still an issue and persistent cause of death. And then we had 1 prescription opioids overdose. And so this is sort of breaking this out into the different drugs that were used. And so if you move to the next slide, what the red bar is basically showing the number of opioids that were involved versus the opioid deaths. And so this is getting at the question of is it like a mixed drugs? Is this heroin mixed with fentanyl, mixed with with fentanyl? And so you can see that the number of mixed opioid deaths has definitely increased in parallel with the somewhat trending upwards opioid deaths. On the next slide is the overdose rate per capita. And so you can see that in Minnesota, compared to the red line, which is the national average, we're lower, generally speaking, and then the highest is West Virginia, which has really been in the focus, and that state is truly overwhelmed with their opioid deaths and actually just overdoses that are not fatal. Next slide. Deaths by natural causes, again, and just trying to see what are the sort of leading causes of death, and you'll see that we have heart disease and cancer are the 2 leaders, which follows nicely with or parallel to the national data. Lung disease, and then followed by and neurologic are the next ones. My suspicion is that over the years we'll probably see a growing number of neurologic deaths as the population ages, neurodegenerative diseases or dementia, that in likelihood of having that increases, as does strokes, as does intracerebral hemorrhage or bleeding within the brain. So my guess is that over the years we'll see an increase in that, trending upwards. On the next slide is the deaths by age group, and so a very positive thing is that we've had to break down of the over 65 category into more subcategories as our population is aging. And so again, what you see is this is very much skewed to the right. If you really want to look quickly at public health data and get a sense of what the sort of lay of the land is, when you see the deaths skewed towards that higher age group, that's a good thing, because that means people are by and large dying of natural diseases. When you start seeing bumps in the younger age groups, that implies that they're dying of non-natural causes, because your 15-year-old doesn't die of their heart disease or their cancer typically. And so again, we have those as relatively low numbers in the younger age groups, which reflects that people are living and dying of their natural disease. The final slide is a summary of our medical examiner activities, and so our number of investigations, the number of death certificates we signed, the scenes that we attended, the autopsies we did, and the number of cases that were reported to us. And you'll see that that's relatively consistent over the years, and obviously what really impacts us is essentially the population. As the population grows, so too does our work, and vice versa. So that's a brief overview of our work this year. Relatively straightforward from our perspective.
So it would be interesting to know on the deaths by age group, we have two in the 11 to 17 age category. We have one 18 to 24, and we have 15, 26 to 44. It would be interesting to know the causes in there to see if there's some prevention activities that could mediate that.
Yeah, I don't know those off the top of my
Yeah.
head, but typically those are the drug overdoses and motor vehicle accidents.
Even the 25 to 44?
Yes.
Yeah, accidents, okay, yeah. Commissioner Ward.
Just a question, I don't know if this is trackable or not, but you know, your opioid deaths
Yeah.
and the magical drug of Narcan.
Yeah.
Can we tell if, in an exam, if any of these people had received Narcan and they still died? Is that a trackable type of thing? I mean, my fear is that we're dependent on Narcan to save people, and we're encouraging, you know, sometimes bad behavior, saying, well, I got this Narcan, I'll be okay. Can we track the effectiveness of that?
So so there's sort of two parts to that question. Is one is, you know, have they been given administered Narcan and did that resuscitate them? And that would not be something that we would be able to track because obviously they survived. We can look at our data and say if emergency responders, arrived and attempted Narcan, or if it was administered, or if they had a response to it. Because actually, that is one of the things that we use as an indicator. Is it a drug overdose because they administered Narcan? And if it's opioid, they do have some sort of response to it. So, we do know that from that sort of first responder data.
Okay.
Right, but there's a time limit too when you can administer the Narcan and be successful. Yeah. A lot of issues, yeah.
Yes, it's a challenging topic.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I buzzed in there.
I'm sorry, I
just wanted to say from our perspective in the county attorney's office, working with Dr. Reichert and his staff and Monica, it's money well spent because of their professionalism and the work that they do with us and the respect that goes both ways. And I just had I guess I'm not sure I would call it pleasure of working with Dr. Quinton on that Rochester case. But he was, so that addition to your staff is great. And I appreciated my staff and I appreciated working with him on that case. So thank you for all that you guys do.
Thank you. I appreciate that too. It's good to have a collegial relationship here.
yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 7.2, the monthly finance and budget update for April. Mr. Moga.
We'll do the April update. Starting revenues in April were, in the general fund, were $9.8 million. Actual revenues were $462,000. Actual expenses were $1.6. Ending cash is $8.6. For the year, we started out with $14.1 million. Actual revenues were $1.6. The actual expenses were $7.9. Ending cash is $8.6. With the funds that are actually being represented here, variance is a negative 8.2 compared to last year's 6.6. And kind of the one thing that is right now, there's a request out for highway funds, and so the revenues in the highway fund are lower right now, but there's a request out to get some funds for projects that are out there. You can see that last year was a pot with a 1.3 compared to a negative 300 this year, so that's kind of one of the factors that's the reason for variance for this year. Any questions on this document? If not, we'll go to the summary. Beginning cash was 18.6. Actual revenues are 6.4. Actual expenses are 14.5. Ending cash is 10.5 million. Same thing, you'll see the variances of the funds that were represented. Any questions on that document? If not, we'll go to the summary budget. Summary budget is April is 33%, and looking at the expenses that are over 33% is the general fund is at 35 and human services at 35 also. I see no concerns at this point. Actually, there's some positive things I'm seeing in the budget that hopefully continue through the year.
I also see our percent for the general revenues is only about 8%, so that the revenues are still catching up.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is the revenues will actually, the biggest amount of the revenues are going to be posted this month
Right.
for our taxes.
Yeah.
And so that'll be a really good indicator at the end of June because we're halfway through the year and we'll have our taxes posted for the halfway through the year. But the other thing is taxes always don't come in equal amounts, so even though we're halfway through the year, we might not get 50%. Some of them might come in July, some come in November. They're all over the place. It'd be nice if they came in just equally.
Yeah, but right now they're very low, so
Correct.
that's going to affect,
Correct.
Yeah. Any questions?
I do.
Yes.
So back to your comment about the funds for road projects.
Yep.
And you indicated that there was a request from what, from the state?
No, the county has to request funds when they actually are doing projects. So we are requesting the funds, they just haven't come in yet at this point. When those requests are requested, it's millions of dollars.
And requested from
the
state.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
We also have that emergency money pending.
Yeah, you mean that Ben was
The
just
200,
Yeah, that has not been, I mean, we've laid out that money, but we actually haven't
Right.
recovered that money.
yeah. Good, thank you very much.
10 years to recoup from a natural disaster.
10 years, okay.
It takes a while to recover.
I think the flood of '07, we were still working it out in 2017, and I think we finally wrapped up some keeping.
Actually, with the highway, there were some dollars that took a while, but the big part of it was closed probably in about 6 years.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have announcements and comments, Commissioner Ward.
Yes, last Monday we did have our AMC district meeting, and we had a presentation from MCIT about jail liabilities, and it was Jennifer Wolf came and did a presentation about predominantly suicides and things in jails. And I thought one thing was interesting, and we're discussing this about double bunking and the systems we have. She shared that she didn't say who, but some jail had a double bunk system, and they had holes in the framing or something, and they actually had to go back through and fill in the holes because they found that a risk factor, a liability for hanging in their. So I thought that was interesting, but she did go over, and so I think that one of the takeaway points is when we get to a certain point that we maybe have MCIT eyes walk through and look at some things and identify from their experiences any potential risks. We had good attendance. Brad Anderson now is the District 9 representative to the AMC board, and that will be good. And June is Dairy Month, and we have the Family Night on the Farm. I know there's some advertising, and they are looking for volunteers. I know a number of the county board members have volunteered in the past. I know they're looking for volunteers, and that's coming up in the end of the month. So look forward to that event, community event. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Meyer.
Yes. So SEMCAC had lost their executive director, and he has been replaced. The guy's name is Doug Kraut, and he's apparently from Houston County and has retained his property in Houston County. He, in the 90s, had worked for SEMCAC and then gone on to do other things for nonprofits and other governmental units. And so he is coming back, and it sounds like he will be terrific. So that was great.
Okay. Commissioner Jacob.
I'd like to ask for a future agenda item to discuss the USDA dairy census information and the financial impacts to the county and the taxpayers.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
So this does not interact with any of the current lawsuits against us?
I would just advise that it be a general discussion about, dairy farming and agriculture in general. I mean, and that can be done.
Okay.
As far as the complex factors that are involved in any look at any agricultural issue.
Okay. Attorney Sonneman, did you have anything else, Commissioner Jacob?
Just that one item.
Okay. Attorney Sonneman?
Well, actually, two things, sorry. Since you mentioned Dairy Month, I forgot about that. But my daughter, who now is 23, was the 1996 dairy baby, born June 1st, and she's coming home today from graduate school, so I'm looking forward to seeing her. But I did also want to mention another fun event starts Steamboat Days. And part of that is the Winona Municipal Band. We start up our season. This will be the 29th season that I play. There's a lot of other people who have been there for a lot longer. But we do kick off our season and also Steamboat Days Wednesday night at 8, and it's a free concert. And members of the band are from all across the county as well as the region. And music directors, attorneys like myself, still got, I think, a retired doctor at least, and many other folks who play music for the passion and the fun of it. So just want to invite people to come to the band shell at Lake Park at 8 o'clock for the free concert of the...
Are you inviting the Nats?
I will be in the band shell, and I hope that the Nats will have been zapped by then. But yeah, please wear hats or...
County attorney is anti-Nat.
They are terrible. I was out walking the dog this morning. I'm like, oh my God. So that's a good point, Commissioner Olson. Wear whatever gets rid of those things, which I understand is not, there's not much that you can do about them. So.
We used bug spray at the Trinona a lot because I was standing out there. Yeah. Attorney Sonneman plays the French horn, which I have always wanted to play. I love the range of that. So it's always good to hear live music. Thank you. Take a motion to adjourn.
I will move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn by Commissioner Meyer, second by Commissioner Olson. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? We're adjourned.